5-Year Rule of Ethiopia by Italy, 1936 to 1941. Today, we have a very important and historical topic to discuss: the 5-Year Rule of Ethiopia by Italy, from 1936 to 1941. This period had a profound impact on Ethiopia and its neighboring countries. We'll explore how the political, social, and economic landscapes of the region were transformed. Let's begin. Italy was a latecomer to the scramble for colonies in Africa. Italy started its ambitions by initially settling along the Red Sea coast, once occupied by Egypt. Between 1869 and 1880, the Rubattino Shipping Company purchased a piece of land along the Red Sea coast from two brothers. The acquisition was later transferred to the Italian government. In 1885, Italian troops landed at Massawa, Assab, and other locations along the coast. On January 1, 1890, Italia formally declared Eritrea its first colony in Africa. In 1889, the Italians signed the Treaty of Wuchal with the then King Menelik of Shewa. The treaty recognized Italy's claim over the coastal colony of Eritrea. Italy and Menelik went on to sign agreements that delimited the borders between present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea in treaties signed and ratified in 1900, 1908. A dispute later arose over the interpretation of the Treaty of Wuchali's language, used in Italian and Amharic. Specifically, Article 17 of the treaty was translated and interpreted differently by Ethiopia and Italy. Italy claimed the article imposed a protectorate over Ethiopia, while Ethiopia claimed the article allowed international diplomacy to be conducted through Italy by choice. As a result, Italy and Abyssinia came into a confrontation known as the Battle of Adwa. Immediately before the Battle of Adwa, the Italian army consisted of 29,700 Italians and 14,000 Eritrean soldiers, known as askaris. Estimates for the Ethiopian forces under Menelik ranged from a low of 73,000 to a high of over 100,000, vastly outnumbering the Italians. The Italians were defeated at the Battle of Adwa. Italy felt humiliated by the crushing defeat under a poorly equipped Ethiopian army, even though Italian troops had been enormously outnumbered. 800 captured Eritreans had their right hands and left feet amputated with axes and machetes by the Ethiopian king. Augustus Wilde records that when he visited the battlefield months after the battle, the pile of severed hands and feet was still visible, a rotting heap of ghastly remnants. Many mutilated askari had not survived. Wilde writing how the neighborhood of Adwa was full of their freshly dead bodies. They had generally crawled to the banks of the streams to quench their thirst, where many of them lingered unattended and exposed to the elements until death put an end to their sufferings. The Italian POWs, on the other hand, were humanely treated by the Ethiopians and expatriated to their country by way of Djibouti. On August 2, 1928, Italy signed a 20-year treaty of friendship with Abyssinia, now known as Ethiopia. Empress Zuditu, Menelik's daughter, ruled Ethiopia at the time of this treaty, and she was represented by a 36-year-old regent, Ras Tafari Mekanen. Within 2 months, Ras Tafari Mekanen became king of Ethiopia and was proclaimed Haile Selassie I. The treaty, which was called the Italo-Ethiopian Treaty of 1928, stipulated any dispute would be decided on a peaceful resolution through mediation. Italy allowed Ethiopia to use the Red Sea port of Assab in the Italian colony of Eritrea. The two nations agreed to build a road between Assab in Eritrea and Dessie in Ethiopia. Around December 7, 1934, a skirmish broke out between an Italian garrison and an Ethiopian militia on the Somalia-Ethiopia border. Both sides claimed the other was to blame for the skirmish. By October 3, 1935, the Italian army led by General Emilio de Bono launched an invasion of Ethiopia without a declaration of war. This was the start of a new war, called the Second Italo-Ethiopian War. In May 1936, the Italian army occupied the Ethiopian capital Addis Ababa. The occupied country was annexed into the Italian East African colony, with the other Italian East African colonies of Somalia and Eritrea. Benito Mussolini justified his invasion of Ethiopia as a civilizing mission, since Ethiopia had not eliminated slavery, even though King Haile Selassie I had signed an accord in 1923 to end slavery in order to gain admittance to the League of Nations. Emperor Haile Selassie fled to England, leaving his subjects to suffer, while he lived in a luxury villa in London. Italy went on to rule Ethiopia for 5 years until 1941. During the 5 years of Italian rule, some of Ethiopia's nobility, like Haile Selassie's Minister of Interior and a grandson of Emperor Yohannes IV of Tigray, were known collaborators with the fascists. There are also reports that one of Shewa's top nobility was spying for the Italians in the years leading up to the 1935 war. During the East African Campaign of 1941, the British, with the help of other Allied powers, launched a counteroffensive in the Horn of Africa. The Italians were defeated and forced to relinquish their colonial possessions in Africa. In 1942, Ethiopia and the United Kingdom signed the first Anglo-Ethiopian agreement, ending British military occupation in most Ethiopia, except the Ogaden. Somalia, the Ogaden, British Somaliland, and Italian Somaliland remained under the British until 1948. The British intended to unite Ogaden with their Somaliland colony, the former Italian colony of Somalia, and the northern frontier district of Kenya, creating a single polity. In turn of events, in 1948, under pressure from their World War I allies, and to the dismay of Somali people, the British returned part of the Ogaden to Ethiopia with a promise of autonomy. Ethiopia, however, immediately reneged on it. Eritrea was placed under British military administration from 1941 to 1952, while its fate was being debated in the General Assembly of the newly established United Nations. Emperor Haile Selassie signed the Eritrean-Ethiopian Federation Act on September 11, 1952, and Eritrea formally joined the federation with Ethiopia on September 15, 1952. On 14 November 1962, the Ethiopian government breached the terms of federation and annexed Eritrea. On September 1, 1961, Eritreans started an armed struggle for independence that consumed Ethiopia for the next 30 years. That concludes our documentary on the 5-year rule of Ethiopia by Italy.